Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another late night conversation. We are going to once again talk about sorry, gotta get the echo out of there. Talk about world events, etc. It's going to be fun, so let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Glad that you are all here. And, we did a stream last night. We're doing a stream tonight. We're going to keep going. And, some things are changing around here, but for the most part, they're not. There's just some formatting changes and all of that. And if you didn't catch that last night, I'll bring you up to date on that. First thing first, we follow our same format, which is opening remarks, whatever's on my mind about current events, followed by the roll call, and then followed by me answering your questions. However, the update is that you can't send questions as super chats anymore because YouTube demonetized us. Wah, wah, wah. Big bummer. So if you want me to answer a question in the second half of the show, you're on Rumble, shoot me a Rumble rant. And if you are not on Rumble, if you're on Facebook or if you're on YouTube, since you can't send me a super chat, the best way is to Cash App me. Send questions as Rumble rants or on Cash App. Hashtag Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. And that is the way that we will be taking questions. Rumble rants or Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. And questions as Rumble rants or Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. And we're following the same format. We're following the exact same format as before. However, about halfway, a little ways into the second half of the show, we're going to Rumble only. And that's so we can talk about the topics that are important to us because YouTube has decided to go into censorship drive. I would prefer, I am at the point of seeing this YouTube channel as a gateway to Rumble. Right? On Rumble, I can talk about what I want. Last night, views were way higher on Rumble than they were on YouTube. And so, I'm heading toward being a Rumble primarily channel. I'm not giving up this YouTube channel as long as I'm able to be on here and have the YouTube channel. I got access to various people. I'm going to maintain my right to be on YouTube. But yeah, during the second half of the show, we're going to go to Rumble only. Sign up on Rumble. Go ahead and sign up on Rumble because on Rumble, I can say whatever I want, whenever I want, and all of that. So, but, we're going to follow our same format. And there you go. So, yeah, if you've got questions, send questions as Rumble rants or on Cash App. You can Cash App me at Caleb Moppin 22. We're just going to follow our same general format that we do our streams in. Couple announcements. First of all, the biggest event of the year is going to be the Chicago National Convention of the Center for Political Innovation. July 12th, 2025. We are going to get 400 people into the Midwest Conference Center. it's very exciting. Peter and I, we've got a little trip to Chicago coming up. We're going to get the ball rolling on the outreach. We just had an outreach meeting for the Center for Political Innovation. Great meeting about how we're going to do it. That's going to be awesome. And coming up in Los Angeles, I'm heading to LA April 19th for a all-day workshop. I believe that's right. That's the day before Easter, which is what Sábado Santo in Spanish, the day after Good Friday. I don't think we have a name for the day before Easter in English, but in Spanish speaking culture, it's Sábado Santo, the sacred Saturday. And that's the day we're having our event in LA. It's just an all-day workshop about CPI, what we stand for. You'll get to meet me. You'll get to meet other members of our organization. It'll just be a fun get-together shindig out in California. So join us on April 19th. That is going to be great. So yeah, as I said before, we're following the exact same format as before. It's just you can't super chat. You can't super chat us. So, on YouTube, the way to send questions is do it as Rumble Rants on Rumble and do it as Cash App. You can Cash App me, Caleb Moppin22, and send your questions. And that's the way we do it. Questions are appreciated. Super chats are appreciated. That's what keeps this channel going. And yeah, as I said, we will stay here on YouTube as long as we possibly can. However, Rumble is where we do have the right to talk about the issues that are important to us, talk about all of that. So probably a little while into the second half of the show, after the first couple questions or so, we're probably going to go to Rumble only, just because YouTube is not the most friendly place lately. YouTube doesn't particularly appreciate my opinions about the Middle East, etc. And they demonetized us. So yeah, send set questions for the second half of the show, Caleb Moppin22 on Cash App, or send Rumble Rants. That's the way we do it. And on that note, we're going to jump right into the opening remarks. Friends, we are in a very bizarre place right now in terms of foreign policy. Last night, I briefed you all about Donald Trump having his meeting with President Putin over the phone. They reached an agreement about a ceasefire regarding energy infrastructure. They're going to be ending the Ukraine war. This is very exciting, but it's not happened yet. It's not over yet. The terms of ending the Ukraine war are going to be worked out in Saudi Arabia between the USA and Russia. Ukraine is not playing ball, or maybe they are playing ball. We're getting a lot of mixed signals here. This is all pretty wild. We hope the Ukraine war can end as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the USA is bombing and continuing to bomb Yemen and threatening to launch an attack against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is absolutely horrendous. Israel has opened up its attacks on the Palestinians, escalated its attacks on the Palestinians. And all of this is against the wishes of the American people. The American people overwhelmingly do not want more U.S. support for wars around the world. They don't want the military in the Red Sea doing Israel's dirty work. They don't want U.S. tax dollars, billions and billions of dollars, to be dumped into Ukraine while Americans can't get the services they need, and our highways and bridges are closing, and people are not thrilled. They're not thrilled about any of this. And anti-establishment sentiment is higher than ever before. The American people, no matter what side of the political spectrum, overwhelmingly feel that the government works for somebody other than them. And the government serves a privileged elite whose interest is different than their interest. And there is a desire for that to change. Now, our leaders, I maintain, are employing a strategy for controlling dissent modeled on Italy's years of lead. And if you don't know what the years of lead were in Italy, I will tell you about that. But when Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, got shot down on the streets of Manhattan, and before the killer had been accused, arrested, identified, there was already widespread celebration. I said, this is toxic. This is toxic and this is dangerous. And this is not a good situation. And so during the holiday season, I wrote a very short book, The Killing of Brian Thompson and the Danger of an American Years of Lead. And I used what happened in Italy, as well as what happened in Jamaica, as well as what happened in Northern Ireland, as an example of modern counterinsurgency strategy and why political violence must be opposed at this time. And I hope YouTube hears this. We are not on here promoting terrorism. We are doing the opposite. We are opposed to terrorism. And what I maintained is that the glorification of political violence on the internet was a way of controlling dissent and reasserting the control of the U.S. status quo. And that may sound bizarre to some people. People say, well, Caleb, that's what dissidents want to do. They want to rise up and revolt. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. And that a surefire way to make sure that the American political establishment is able to reassert itself is to create a culture of political violence. A culture of political violence where people are afraid to get politically active because there is a huge amount of killing and violence. Create a situation where the opposition to the status quo in the United States is heavily divided and confused and violent and dangerous, where people don't want to get involved because it doesn't make any sense. That this is what is going on at this time. That because the public is so overwhelmingly opposed to what globalism, imperialism is doing, because Americans don't have jobs and healthcare and education, because the economic and political system is rendering many people without the lifestyle they once enjoyed, with their living standards going down, that the ruling elite are looking to control opposition in a way that makes it so it is impotent, ineffective, and the ruling status quo that is wildly unpopular can reassert support and reassert itself in light of popular distrust. And I said that the glorification of the murder of Brian Thompson was one example of this. Now we're seeing the widespread vandalism against Tesla cars, right? Because Elon Musk is working with Donald Trump, Department of Government Efficiency, the Doge. We're seeing now a widespread promotion and glorification of people burning Tesla cars, destroying Tesla cars, etc. And this doesn't hurt Donald Trump in any way. This doesn't really hurt Elon Musk in any way. Those cars are insured, and Donald Trump can beat his chest. Look at the far left, the dangerous extremists. This doesn't hurt Donald Trump. This hurts anybody who would like to build a genuine movement against imperialism, because it creates a situation where those who are opposed to the status quo are divided between those who view the status quo and criticize it in a right-wing way or a libertarian way, and those who view it, criticize it in a left-wing way. And it creates a situation where those Americans who support Donald Trump feel that they are under attack. And so they will support more government repression, even though Donald Trump ran on a platform of free speech. We see Donald Trump, deporting Mahmoud Khalil for his speech. And many people in the Trump camp saying no and opposing that. Ann Coulter opposing that. Candace Owens opposing that. Many people in the Trump camp opposing Donald Trump not sticking by his principles of free speech and engaging in repression of pro-Palestine students. So many in the Trump camp are not celebrating Donald Trump's moves against free speech. Many in the Trump camp are not celebrating Donald Trump's escalation of military conflict in the Middle East region. This is all very good. However, now we have people on the far left, allegedly, we don't know who they are, that are burning Teslas. They're burning Tesla cars. And that, of course, is creating, and this is all part of a strategy. And I want to get into this tonight. I want to talk about what we really need to do and why we need to reject political violence and what this crazy, confusing political atmosphere that we're in really means. I would argue that the current political scenario is by far the most unclear and murky political scenario we've had in America since the administration of Jimmy Carter. That's what I would argue. Things don't make sense right now. And they don't make sense. I mean, nothing makes sense, right? When I was first getting politically active, George W. Bush, I am the decider, the commander-in-chief of America, waging a war on terror. Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, and those weapons of mass destruction in Iraq mean we have to invade Iraq. And it was very clear that George W. Bush and his supporters, who were pushing for the invasion of Iraq, were supporting the government spying on people, were justifying torture. They were the main force to be opposed. They had pretty widespread public support, but there were a lot of people who opposed them. And so libertarians opposed them. The far left opposed them. Most people opposed them. The Democrats were the main opposition party, but those who opposed them were generally to the left of the Democrats. Things made sense. Bush was doing a lot of things that were bad, like getting us into wars, like suppressing our civil liberties, like torturing people. And he was doing all of that. And if you were against it, at that point, why you could oppose what Bush was doing. We're not living in those times any longer. We are not living in those times. We are living in much more confusing times, much more confusing times. And it's not clear at this point where everything stands. And the beginning of that was the administration of Barack Hussein Obama. And Barack Hussein Obama came into office as a progressive. He was gonna repudiate the Bush years, and he oversaw the Arab Spring, which was an absolute disaster for humanity. The Arab Spring was a nightmare that led to a horrendous, destructive revolution in the most prosperous and wealthy country in Africa, Libya, and it led to a horrendous civil war in Syria that continued right up until recently when the Syrian Arab Republic was overthrown. And Barack Obama did all of the same things that Bush did, but he did it with kind of a progressive sounding woke politics. Meanwhile, the opposition to Barack Obama, which was originally people that were supportive of Bush, were defending Bush, the opposition to Barack Obama started getting better. And Donald Trump came into office promising he would end the wars, promising to protect our civil liberties. It got very confusing. Donald Trump did his first term, and Donald Trump was basically ousted in what we now know was a deep state coup. The FBI decided that Hunter Biden's laptop, which was real, the son of presidential candidate Joe Biden and his corrupt business dealings, was not allowed to be discussed in the media. And the FBI went to Facebook and Twitter and said, do not allow anyone to share links about it. And the FBI went to all the mainstream media and said, do not cover it. And a major story was suppressed. And Donald Trump lost the 2020 election because the FBI rigged the media against Donald Trump. And, and it was very, very clear that Donald Trump was ousted by the deep state because he was not trustworthy, even though Donald Trump had murdered Qasem Soleimani, even though Donald Trump had continued to give weapons to Ukraine. That wasn't enough, and they ousted Donald Trump. And then Joe Biden came in, and under Joe Biden's leadership, we got a huge crackdown. A number of Trump supporters were arrested. The Uhuru movement, the People's Democratic Uhuru movement, a group of black socialists, black radical socialists, had their homes raided by the FBI, and they were dragged into federal court, almost went to prison just for their speech opposing U.S. policy. The USA was able to foment and create a war in Ukraine. Russian media in the United States was banned from YouTube. RT was shut down. I mean, it was absolutely a disaster. And now Donald Trump is back in office because the American people didn't want that disaster. The American people didn't like the fact that the FBI manipulated the elections and lied to them. The American people didn't like the idea of having their civil liberties taken away. They wanted free speech. They hated the cancel culture. They hated billions of dollars being spent on war. And the American people voted for free speech. The American people voted to end the wars. The American people voted against, austerity and driving down living standards and ecological pessimism. And the American people voted for Donald Trump in a blowout as kind of a repudiation of the Joe Biden agenda. Now we've got a president who came into office promising peace, but he's not delivering in the Middle East, but he is looking like he might end up delivering when it comes to Ukraine. Meanwhile, he is engaging in the biggest austerity move ever. He's in the process of basically dismantling the federal government, getting rid of all kinds of government agencies, laying off thousands of government workers, completely restructuring the federal level of the American state apparatus. All of this is very, very confusing. And if you look at this, I'll just say this. The response to this very confusing political scenario we're in, where Donald Trump, he's deporting a Palestine activist, Mahmoud Khalil, and there's widespread support for Mahmoud Khalil, including people in Trump's camp are loudly supporting him. Donald Trump is negotiating with him. It's a very confusing political situation. There is a layer of people who think this is still the Bush years. And their interpretation of events is Donald Trump bad. And it's like, you're missing the boat if you think Donald Trump bad. All right? You are completely missing the boat. Because the people who think Donald Trump is bad think he's bad because he's not escalating the conflict in Ukraine, because he's making peace with Russia. The people who think Donald Trump bad think he's bad because he promised to allow more free speech. The people who think Donald Trump bad think he's bad because he's fighting with the FBI. Like, the opposition to Trump is coming from people who want Trump to be worse. That's really clear. But at the same time, Trump is doing things that are not good. But Donald Trump's movement has a lot of people in it who supported Trump for good reasons and are even willing to call out Trump on issues like Mahmoud Khalil, on issues like the bombing of Yemen. It's complicated. And for people who think that that the way to approach this is to say, Donald Trump bad, Donald Trump is a big fat racist, it's not that simple. We're navigating a very complex situation where there are divisions within our ruling class. There's all kinds of confusion. And we have to be clear about what we want. What do we want? We want a government of action that will fight for working families. We want to oppose the danger of a low-wage police state. We want to oppose the danger of a new world war. And we want a government of action that will fight for working families. And that's what we're for. And if Donald Trump were for that, we would be for Trump. And if the Democrats were for that, we would be for the Democrats. Neither of them are for that. However, people who are in opposition to the status quo tend to be in the Trump camp, whereas the left have become the foot soldiers of the status quo to try and control and contain Donald Trump. It's a very complex situation. And the biggest mistake we could make is retreating into leftism and just going back to join the resist, going to just be leftist. That would be the biggest mistake we would make, because the left sucks. The left completely sucks, and the left is on the wrong side. The left hates Russia more than anybody. The left abandoned one of their own, the Uhuru movement, a group of black socialists, and they couldn't even defend them. The left basically thinks that if you are opposed to war with Russia, if you challenge mainstream media, you're spreading conspiracy theories, you're racist, you need to have your social media accounts shut down, you need to be beaten up and killed, you must be a Nazi, right? The left is becoming has just turned into a completely toxic entity. And it's still that. And now the left is escalating to violence. They're glorifying the murder of Brian Thompson, and they're burning Teslas. And there's a lot of very, very good people in the Trump camp who feel their physical safety is under threat because the left is advocating violence against them. The left is advocating violence against them. It's basically saying they deserve to be killed. And for the things that they think that are legit, like questioning the lockdowns, like opposing the mainstream media, like not wanting World War III against Russia, like not supporting, climate austerity and making everyone poorer in the name of the environment, and so we're having a weird situation here where there's a lot of good people in the Trump camp, but Trump is doing not good things, where the left are just completely the foot soldiers of the establishment, defending the establishment, right? And so we're in this very, very odd situation where really, what do we need to do? Put forward our program, put forward our vision, our pro-growth, pro-humanity vision. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And instead of spending money on wars, we need a government that paves the roads and highways and bridges. We need a government that hires the unemployed and puts them to work. We need a government that takes control of our natural resources. We need a national bank that will inject credit into communities. And we need to unleash human growth and innovation. And we need to build and construct. And instead of bombing and destroying countries around the world, and instead of having less to save Mother Nature, and instead of driving down the population, we need to celebrate human creativity and brilliance and build and construct. We need a government of action that will fight for working families and unleash human creativity. That's what we need. And we have to just put that message out there, that anti-imperialist, anti-globalist, anti-war, pro-working families, pro-civil liberties, pro-growth, pro-innovation message. We just have to get that message on blast everywhere. And that's our job, is to just get that to as many people as possible and build a community of people that are dedicated to getting that message everywhere and putting on workshops and teaching people this message and doing outreach and having many rallies where we put out this message. We need to distribute our books. We need to have seminars and conferences. We need to do community outreach, and we eventually need to start doing community service. I would like to see us provide services to people that are struggling and providing aid. I'd like us to get to that point. I'd like us to engage in outreach on a massive scale. I would like us to build a community around our optimistic pro-growth message, opposing the emerging low-wage police state, opposing globalism and imperialism. That's what we have to do. There's really no alternative to doing this. There's absolutely no alternative to doing this. And one alternative that is just right out there is political violence. We don't need political violence. And this political violence is intended to derail, confuse, and polarize the American people. And that is the intent. The idea is to create a culture of violence. So let's just use my 3 case studies. One thing that I have, one thing that I have studied is counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency. Now, communist groups, communist organizations have been the primary anti-imperialist force in the 20th century. Nowadays, things have changed, right? Old Soviet-style communism is nowhere to be found. In Iran, they're not communists. They're Shia Muslims, not capitalism, but Islam. In Latin America, you've got Bolivarian socialism. In Africa, you've got a wave of new anti-colonial military governments. China, they're doing socialism with Chinese characteristics. Russia has reasserted its economic independence, Russian nationalism, pride in the history of the Soviet Union, Orthodox Christianity. It's a mixed bag. But all of these countries are in favor of economic growth. They want to raise their people up and they want to build. And imperialism, the economic system that we live under, the rule of the world by big banks and monopolies, needs to grind everyone into poverty, needs to reduce the population, needs to reduce consumption, needs austerity, needs impoverishment, needs degrowth in order to keep itself at the top. And so the BRICS economy and the various forces around the world that are resisting imperialism, they want to raise the population. They want to advance technology, raise people up out of poverty. They want to build, and they are pro-growth, whereas the imperialists are anti-growth. And that's the situation that we're in. And around the world, there have been various countries that have fought to break out of imperialist domination. There have been many efforts to keep countries under imperialist domination. Great example was, and when I talk about counterinsurgency, Sir Frank Kitson. Frank Kitson was the leader of low-intensity operations for the British Empire in Kenya and in Northern Ireland. And he wrote a book about how the Mau Mau Land and Freedom Army in Kenya was defeated during the 1950s. There was an uprising of the Kenyan people against the British Empire. They didn't want to be dominated by the British. They wanted economic development. So the Land and Freedom Army of Kenya rose up against the British Empire. And Frank Kitson oversaw defeating the Land and Freedom Army. And he developed the method of building what are called counter gangs of people that looked like Mau Mau liberation fighters, but were actually agents of the British, and muddying the waters and confusing the opposition to the British so that the British could reassert control, making it so that the Mau Mau Land and Freedom Army was fighting other groups of Black liberation fighters, was divided, was confused. People didn't know who was on what side, and all of that led to a situation where the British were victorious against the Mau Mau Land and Freedom Army. And Sir Frank Kitson wrote his book, Gangs and Counter Gangs. More recently, in Iraq, there was a dramatic shift in U.S. policy during the second term of George W. Bush. They called it the surge. And the USA was basically able to quell a lot of the opposition to their presence in Iraq, the insurgency. And the man who was kind of heavily involved in that strategy was a guy named William S. Lind. William S. Lind is a Pentagon strategist. He's also a conservative, a Republican, a Trump supporter. And he wrote a book called The Handbook to Fourth Generation Warfare. And he's really engineered this concept of what he calls fourth generation warfare. And if you read both Frank Kitson and William S. Lind, you will get an understanding of how it is that they defeat insurgents and how are insurgents defeated. And in that book, Handbook of Fourth Generation Warfare, William S. Lind talks about the story of David and Goliath. The story of David and Goliath has been told for 4,000 years. And in the entire history of that story, very, very few people have ever sympathized with Goliath. Right? Goliath is this giant. David is this little boy. And the little boy goes out with his sling to fight this giant, this huge, tall man. And he's victorious. And we all like that story because we like the underdog. Well, the way that insurgencies are successful is they become the underdog. The state, the imperialists, the existing power becomes Goliath, and everyone starts cheering for David because there's things they don't like about the society they live in. There's things they don't like, and nobody likes a big bully, right? So they start cheering for David, and that's how the Vietnamese won, right? They were David. America was Goliath, and that's how they won. In Algeria, that's how the Algerian Revolution against French colonialism was successful. It was a David versus Goliath. That's how Fidel Castro won in Cuba. He wasn't even calling himself a communist at the beginning. He just had the July 26 movement, but he was David, and the U.S.-backed dictatorship of Batista was Goliath, and that by framing things as, the people, the revolutionaries versus the big, powerful state, that's how insurgencies win over a population, are ultimately victorious. And that when a major army, right, and then when a powerful imperialist army like the U.S. military or the British army fights against insurgents, which, like Fidel Castro's groups, like the Land and Freedom Army, like the Vietnamese, William S. Lind, in his writing, he says that's very similar to an adult who has a small child and gives them a prolonged beating in a public place. Now, some people might think corporal punishment is a good thing. Maybe that child deserves a beating. But the child is very, very small, and the adult is very, very large, and the adult just beats on them for a long time. Eventually, all the other adults are going to jump in and intervene and stop the adult from beating on the child. And they're not going to care what the child has done. They're not going to be interested in the circumstances. They're just going to see this is a big adult who's beating on a small child. And that is why when the U.S. Army goes to fight the Vietnamese, they might win the battle and they might kill a lot of Vietnamese people, but the population sympathizes with the National Liberation Front, and that this is how, and that insurgencies are very much wars based on public perception. If the public is with the insurgents, it doesn't matter, even if there's superior force on the part of the occupier, right? If the public is with the insurgents, this is very, very important. And so William S. Lind and Frank Kitson developed all kinds of methods for manipulating insurgencies. And basically, when you have an insurgency, an insurgent force that has a huge amount of support among a population, how do you make sure that insurgent force is not able to assert itself and displace the powers that be? And this doesn't just apply to military confrontations, because two of the situations I'm about to describe here were not really military situations. And that's the point. These were not Italy. Italy is the first one. And the years of lead in Italy, from the 1960s to the 1980s, Italy experienced what was called the years of lead. And what was happening was that in Italy, the Communist Party was very popular. The Communist Party of Italy had fought Mussolini. They had the partisan brigades. They had led the people of northern Italy in the mountains to fight against Mussolini, right? There's a whole history. There's a communist song, it's very popular. Soy comunista, toda la vida, bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao. The Communist Party of Italy was very popular. It was the largest political party in Europe. It had millions of members. They had lots of seats in parliament. And they wanted Italy to leave NATO. And many people in Italy, maybe they weren't voting for the Communist Party, but they didn't like NATO. They did not like the United States. If democracy had prevailed in Italy, Italy would have left the NATO alliance and probably started moving to become a socialist country during the 1950s. Well, the U.S. intelligence apparatus and the British intelligence and NATO basically figured, how do we make sure that the Italian peninsula doesn't go into the Soviet camp? How do we make sure the Italian peninsula doesn't leave NATO? And they launched something called Operation Gladio. And what was Operation Gladio? Operation Gladio was manipulating Italian politics to make sure that the anti-NATO forces never had enough strength to actually take power and move Italy away from NATO. And Operation Gladio resulted in a period in Italy called the Years of Lead. It's got a Wikipedia page. You can read all about it. 426 people died, but many, many other people were injured. And what happened was the Italian Communist Party was very popular, and it became the target of fascist violence. Far-right groups that admired Mussolini got funding and support covertly from the CIA, from the government, and they started killing communists. Now, what's interesting is a lot of these Italian far-right groups were also against NATO, right? They thought that NATO was, globalist or whatever, and that in their far-right nationalist perspective, they were also against NATO. But their far-right ideology said communism is the greatest enemy, communism is the threat, and they were getting all kinds of funding and boosting and didn't exactly know where it was coming from, so they started killing communists. So the Italian Communist Party very much, got on the defensive because they're being attacked by fascists. Then something called the Red Brigades emerged. The Red Brigades were a group of communist terrorists in Italy. They were young Maoists who thought the Italian Communist Party sold out and was not revolutionary. So they formed their own groups, and they started going around committing bombings and assassinations, killing fascists, etc. And it started that they would kidnap a group of workers were on strike. They might kidnap the boss. They started retaliating against judges who threw their members in jail. But then the Red Brigade started killing leaders of the Italian Communist Party. And it started out in the 1950s in Italy. You had a situation where you had the Communist Party that was very large. You had a public that was opposed to NATO. You had sentiments that Italy might leave NATO. By the 1980s, it was so confusing and it was so much of a clusterfuck, and there was so much violence and killing and confusion with fascists killing communists, communists killing fascists, communists killing other communists, fascists killing other fascists, bombings, assassinations. People were leaving Italy en masse, moving to the United States. There was a lot of migration out of Italy. People just didn't want to live there anymore. And people got scared to get involved in politics. And if you didn't get killed, you would get, it was very common for people to be shot in their legs and crippled for life. And that was a really common targeting. And if you were in one political group, people from another political group might murder you and shoot you. And this was a really, and politics got so ugly and messy that Italy never left NATO. 1978, the Communist Party got the highest percentage they'd ever gotten in the elections. And so the Christian Democrat Party, which was a conservative party, went to the Communist Party and offered to form a coalition government. And a former prime minister of Italy named Aldo Moro went to the communists and offered to make that deal. The Red Brigades, the communist terrorists, kidnapped him to prevent that deal from happening. And eventually murdered him. It was later revealed that the Italian government knew where Aldo Moro was being held, but wouldn't go rescue him because they were taking orders from the CIA and from the P2 Masonic Lodge, which was the vehicle through which the CIA was fighting communism in Italy. And that was revealed. And throughout the 70s and 80s, they made politics in Italy such a violent, confusing mess that a public that was overwhelmingly opposed to NATO ended up staying in NATO. And it was a mess. And a lot of people got killed and a lot of people got hurt. And you'll notice that Italy is still a member of NATO. Now, and what happened? The Italian Communist Party was not a violent political party. They wanted a peaceful transition to socialism. And it was through escalating to violence prematurely. By having the fascists start murdering communists, having the Red Brigades start killing fascists and then start killing other it was by escalating to violence and creating a violent situation that they were able to do this, right? And that's the years of lead. And that's what I would argue is happening in America. But I can give other examples. For example, Jamaica. During the 1970s, in Jamaica, there was a lot of admiration for Fidel Castro. Jamaica and Cuba are not that far away from each other. And there was a widespread anti-imperialist movement. There were a lot of strikes among workers, etc. And in Jamaica, you had a socialist leader got elected president, Michael Manley. And Michael Manley was the elected leader of Jamaica. And he was from the National People's Party. And he said he wanted to move Jamaica to be a democratic socialist country. And he wanted to align Jamaica with Fidel Castro. He considered Fidel Castro to be his friend, and he wanted to align Jamaica with the Soviet Union. Now, the United States obviously did not like that. And there's a huge amount of crime in Jamaica. Jamaica has a big problem with organized crime. And Jamaica was divided. The main pro-American, pro-British party was called the Labour Party, the Jamaican Labour Party. And the party that was sympathetic to the Soviet Union and Cuba was called the National People's Party. So the criminal organizations of Jamaica started aligning with different political groups. And there was a group in Jamaica, a criminal gang called Shower Posse. And you can read all about the Shower Posse. They were a criminal gang, drug dealers. They sold cocaine, and they were just a nasty group of criminals. But they got training from the CIA. And shower posse, they were brought to the United States and they were given guns and weapons and they were trained by the CIA. And in Italy or in Jamaica, they started killing people that were sympathetic to Michael Manley. Michael Manley and the Soviet Union and their allies, they obviously, they then found criminal organizations that were aligned with them. And these criminal organizations started killing and retaliating against people that were associated with Shower Posse and with the Jamaican Labor Party. And that in the 1970s and throughout the 1980s, there was a huge amount of violence in Jamaica. And what was the result? Did it lead Jamaica, right, toward becoming an anti-imperialist socialist country? No. It led to a situation where the population got weary of the violence. And at the same time that the CIA was arming Shower Posse, there were all kinds of guns and weapons going into Jamaica, etc. They were also putting out a message of peace and reconciliation. And this is a very interesting thing. And we'll talk about this with Northern Ireland in a minute. But, Bob Marley had his One Love concert where major record companies paid this musician Bob Marley to have a concert where the leader of the Jamaican Labor Party and the leader of the National People's Party joined hands, and it was one love. Can't we all just get along? Can't we all just get along? Well, people weren't getting along. There was political violence and assassinations going. All of that was being done to prevent the democratic process. Jamaica was moving toward socialism based on public opinion. The people of Jamaica wanted to move toward anti-imperialism and socialism. But an atmosphere of huge, massive political violence emerged where it stopped really being about what do you want for the country, and it started being about who's getting shot at, what neighborhood you were from. And I've met people from Jamaica who told me, I never knew anything about politics. I didn't care about socialism. I just knew that my neighborhood was on the hit list of the Shower Posse, so I supported Michael Manley. And other people said, well, I knew my neighborhood, the gang that was against Michael Manley, they protected my neighborhood, and increasingly it became about violence, and there was a feeling that you shouldn't get involved in politics because you might get killed, you might get assassinated. And the political situation in Jamaica was more and more unstable, and people just left the island and moved to the United States, widespread migration to the United States. Well, look at Jamaica now. Is Jamaica a socialist country? Is Jamaica anti-imperialist? Not at all. Now, the leader of Shower Posse, this gang that was used by the CIA, this leader, I believe his name is like Christopher Koch or something like Christopher. Anyway, that guy, he was so powerful as a criminal that they arrested him, and he basically waged civil war with the Jamaican government. And there was like a big long standoff, and he was eventually extradited to the United States and imprisoned. And the United States ended up having to basically carry out a military operation against a gangster they had once supported. But you look at that, how were they able to control Jamaica? It was by escalating to political violence, creating a situation where it was not about principle, it was not about politics, it was not about what you believe in, it was about who's shooting at you, creating a situation where people are afraid to get politically active because they might get shot, and doing all of that and just creating a mess. And the powers that be, imperialism, still runs Jamaica. End of story. This is counterinsurgency. And the last example I'll use, this was a civil war. This was an armed conflict, right? This one wasn't people trying to peacefully move towards socialism. This was an actual armed conflict, but it was the same tactic, and that's Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants, very divided. Northern Ireland is separated from the rest of Ireland. The 6 counties are part of Northern Ireland. The rest of Ireland is the Republic of Ireland. And in the 6 counties, there are many Catholics and many working class people who want a unified Ireland and want, Ireland to break out of the domination of the British and move towards socialism. And that's been that way. And you talk about James Connolly, and you talk about, there's a whole history of that. Well, in the 1960s, the Provisional Irish Republican Army emerged, and in a lot of Catholic neighborhoods and a lot of working class areas in Northern Ireland, the Provos, they were called, the Provisional IRA, had a lot of support, and there was an insurgency of people who wanted Northern Ireland to be independent from the British Empire. How was it that the British Empire was able to defeat the Provisional Irish Republican Army and get them to surrender with the Good Friday Agreement? How did that happen? Well, the way it was done was that the British military technically received more casualties than it inflicted. They kept direct fights between the British military and the IRA to a minimum. And instead, what was done was that the British military, led by Frank Kitson, began arming Protestant extremists and having Protestant extremists kill IRA fighters. And so when people saw, it was very different. If the British military had killed IRA fighters, everyone would be like, well, that's the British, the colonizer, they're killing the Irish people. But if Protestants kill IRA fighters, people look at that and they say, wow, this is a religious fight. Can't we all get along? We all pray to the same God. Can't we all just get along? Well, it worked that way. Plus, right, the IRA is in very impoverished neighborhoods, and drugs were a rising thing during the 1960s and 70s. Drug culture was rising, and there were many people in Northern Ireland who were using drugs. And the IRA had to deal with the presence of drugs. And the IRA, to one degree or other, drug dealers and the IRA had some kind of relationship. Now, many people have pointed out that the IRA itself, they executed drug dealers and assassinated drug dealers. They wouldn't allow, if their members used drugs, they could be killed or expelled or whatever. But regardless, the IRA had to come to an understanding with a lot of criminal organizations. Now, did that help the IRA? No. But why was that? There were other criminal organizations that were being supported by the British government to target the IRA. And so the drug trade was going on, and the IRA is fighting some drug dealers and has to enter an alliance with other drug dealers. And so people see that. And again, that makes it's not about, do we want to break free from the British Empire? It becomes, do we want to, is it this drug gang or that drug gang? Plus, you have Protestant extremist groups assassinating IRA fighters. And then at the same time, just like in Jamaica, the Vatican is putting out this message of give peace a chance. And they're having neighborhoods where Catholic and Protestant school kids walk together. And can't we all just get along? Can't we all just get along? The IRA is dealing with the drug gangs and drug assassinations with Protestant extremists. Oh, and there's Trotskyites, mind you. There's a bunch of Trotskyite groups that are saying the IRA are a bunch of sellouts. There's a bunch of Maoist groups that are saying the IRA are British agents of the Soviet imperialists, and we want pure communism. And it gets really confusing. And so the IRA, it started out as the IRA, the Provisional IRA, versus the British Empire. And by the 1990s, it was not that at all. It was an insane clusterfuck. It was a confusing mess. And there was a lot of violence. There was a lot of violence and a lot of killing. And in a lot of cases, it wasn't clear who was doing it. There were bombings that were blamed on the IRA that were not done by the IRA. They were done by ultra-leftist groups, by Trotskyite groups. There were Trotskyite groups that did bombings. There were Maoist groups, and then there were assassinations of IRA leaders that were actually done by the British government, but they were blamed on Protestant extremist groups. And it just turned into a complete mess. And then the Soviet Union fell, so the IRA didn't have international support like it once did. And it just got to the point that, the IRA surrendered. And they surrendered. And there was an amnesty. All the IRA prisoners were freed. And now look at Northern Ireland. It's part of the British Empire. It's part of the United Kingdom. The people there are still living under the domination. And this is the tactic that's used, right? And this is what I'm telling you. The Tesla burnings, the celebration of the killing of Brian Thompson. This is a strategy. This is a counterinsurgency strategy. The American people oppose NATO. The American people oppose all these wars around the world. The American people oppose the emerging low-wage police state. And our rulers know that. They've given up on that. They're not going to convince us to support their wars. They're not going to convince us to support the emerging low-wage police state. They're trying to win by default. And the way that they can win by default is by creating a clusterfuck, making the opposition to them so confused and violent and messy and etc. that they win by default. And that's what they want, right? You can be the the worst team in the world, but if the other team forfeits the game, you still win. And that's basically what they're counting on. They're not trying to convince us to like things in America. They're not trying to convince us that this is the greatest country in the world, this is the greatest system. They've given up on all of that. They just want to make sure that the opposition at this point is so divided and confused and ugly that there's nothing they can do about it. You know, we had an event in Minneapolis about a month ago, and there were protesters outside. You will notice that those protesters who protested our event in Minneapolis, the signs they had made no goddamn sense. Anyone who was walking by would have had no idea what they were talking about. That's the point, right? Anyone walking by, you know, was out for a morning walk to walk the dog in our, you know, working class neighborhood where we had an event. They walked by and they saw signs about spanking and signs about, you know, about Russia and Putin, and they would have just been like, this is weird, and they would have just walked away, right? But the people that were protesting us are in so much of a bubble that they thought those signs made sense. And I'm telling you, this is how a counterinsurgency is waged, right? Right? We're not supposed to be building a mass movement of American working people who are opposed to the emerging low-wage police state. They want us fighting a fight. They want gang versus counter gang. They want, you know, the guy in the white hat fighting the guy in the black hat. They want us engaged in some kind of intricate side war. They want various counter gangs fighting various counter gangs, having vendettas, and they want to create an ugly atmosphere where all of us that are opposed to the status quo, more or less, are divided from each other, threatening each other, afraid to work together, etc., to the point that the government and prevailing institutions and NATO and globalism and tech censorship and the emerging low-wage police state can win by default. So burning Teslas, celebrating what Luigi Mangione allegedly did, creating a culture of political violence, creating a situation where everyone's worried about this or that. That is the main way they are trying to control the opposition in the United States right now. And they're doing a great job of it, I must say. We in CPI are smart enough to not fall for it. Right? And we have steered clear of a lot of intended provocations aimed at us. To our credit, we actually probably played a very significant role in making sure there was no rioting on Donald Trump's inauguration day. And we got a video about that coming out shortly. We just got to finish editing that, but we can document that, you know, the Party of Socialism and Liberation was planning to facilitate a riot against Donald Trump's inauguration. And the cold weather certainly helped. But we created a situation where PSL basically had to back down. And we're very proud of that. And it shows what we can do. But there is a political atmosphere being created. One of the main things that they're using is fandom. Fandoms become less and less political. Every dissident space. And I'll end my opening remarks for tonight by pointing out something that I've said on many previous streams. Or I said it last night. I haven't said it on many previous streams, but I've said it last night. By, you know, every political space, you know, in the United States right now, every dissident political space, there's basically three primary dissident political spaces. There's leftism, socialism, communism, leftism. There's libertarianism, and there's the far right. All three of those spaces are controlled by influencers, people that are not members of any organization, people that are not organizing protests and demonstrations, people are not building any real organization, people that are just on the internet, blah, 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 talking, etc. And over time, these influencers are building a fandom. It is about them as a person. It is not about principles. It's about, do you like them or do you like their rivals, right? Are you on the red team or on the blue team? It is about loyalty to their personality rather than being involved in any organization. And these influencers are the libertarian influencers, the far right influencers, and the leftist influencers are all boosted like crazy. They all get hundreds of thousands of subscribers. They all get advertisements in mainstream media, basically promoting them. And then, right, they then take aim and smear and cancel anyone who's doing any real organizing. And great example, libertarianism, right? Angela McCurdle is a real organizer. She led the Libertarian Party to do real shit. Look, I'm not a libertarian, but when she was leading the Libertarian Party, they had a huge rally in Washington, D.C. called Rage Against the War Machine. And they had a second Rage Against the War Machine. And they had a rally for the Republic with Jordan Peterson. And the Libertarian Party was organizing mobilizations against the low-wage police state in favor of civil liberties and against war. These were very broad mobilizations, especially Rage Against the War Machine. A lot of leftists were there. We sponsored it, and others sponsored it. And you'll notice that various big-name libertarians took aim at her during that. People who weren't organizing anything, right? Spike Cohen, Dave Smith, they all, you can't have a rally with Scott Ritter. You can't have it. And they just went into overdrive. And Angela McCurdle held the Libertarian Party together and engaged in building a real organization. But libertarianism on the internet, not real organization, but libertarianism on the internet was just, this got to destroy Angela McCurdle. Why? Why did they have to destroy Angela McCurdle? Because they're building a fandom, and those people got boosted. And if you look at Angela McCurdle, despite being the head of the Libertarian Party, her YouTube channel was very small, and her Patreon was very small. Whereas these people who were very, very opposed to her building these actual rallies to try and change the political conversation, their following was massive. They had hundreds of thousands of people. This is how the game is played. There are certain far-right personalities, I must say. I'm not on the far right, but there is, Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is artificially inflated, and he is the big shock jock of the far right, right? And he is not connected to any organization. He's just an asshole on the internet. And I mean, some people find him entertaining to listen to. He uses racial and ethnic slurs and all of that, but he's not connected to any real organization. However, he mobilizes his followers to target anyone who is. And he's huge and inflated. And if anyone is trying to organize any kind of real far-right activity, he attacks them. And there's similar things that go on in communist circles. I think you all know what I'm talking about, right? First there was BreadTube, and then there's there's other things that have come since then, right? And that this is the way the game is played, okay? It is about preventing any real organization from being created by creating a fandom. And increasingly, all three of the influencers, the libertarian influencers, the leftist influencers, the far-right influencers, it becomes less and less political. And it becomes more and more about their personality. Over time, it just turns into, I think this guy on the internet is really cool. I think this woman on the internet is really cool. That's what it turns into. And it stops being about actual politics. And, and then they fight with other influencers, and they, are you for this one? Are you for that one? And they have a rivalry, and some mainstream media just boosted this one. Well, it's bullshit. We got to support this one. And it deteriorates into fandom, and no real activity is being done. And if you talk to someone who's caught up in a fandom, they're speaking a different language. Average people walk up to somebody who's really into the Nick Fuentes universe, and they sound like an asshole. They're using racial slurs or whatever, and they're going to use a bunch of words that no one can understand what they're saying. And they're going to talk about groypers. What's a groyper? I don't know what a groyper is, right? And they're going to use, like acronyms, ADL, and no one's going to know what they're talking about. And the same for people that are caught up in these libertarian fandoms. Again, you talk to somebody who's caught up in a libertarian fandom. Oh, well, what about the NAP? What about and they're using a bunch of words no one can understand. And they're not thinking about how to actually enact libertarian policies. They're thinking about this other libertarian who disrespected blah, blah, blah. And I'm mad. And they're in a fandom, and they're disconnected from the masses, right? And the same in our circles. It increasingly stops being about putting forward a coherent political message, and it becomes about about a bunch of other things, right? And they fight each other, And there's a huge amount of smearing and violence, and there's a huge amount of doxing people, getting people fired from their jobs, a huge amount of hate. And I would argue that what's particularly dangerous about the Brian Thompson killing and the Tesla burning is that this is all escalating toward these people not just smearing each other, not just getting people fired from their jobs, but actually toward people physically harming each other. And that's very dangerous, right? And we have got to just say no to it. And I'm going to end with something that I said last night that needs to be said once again, right? And again, some of you may not be ready to hear this, but it must be said. And the swatting, I put that, before I go on, the swatting, the way people are getting swatted right now, that's absolutely crazy. The swatting, unbelievable, right? You know, you don't have to agree with this person. You don't swat somebody. You don't send the SWAT team to their house. You don't call up the police and make up something so that their house gets raided by the SWAT team. Good night. But all this leads me to a point that I think I need to say a lot more, which is that when it really gets down to it, the issue in our world is the fight between humanity and the forces who think man is an animal. Human beings force the environment to serve them. They are the creative species that takes the world and reinvents it in a more efficient way that increases our population, increases our life expectancy. Human beings are pro-growth. Human beings are innovators. That is the nature of mankind. We are a pro-growth species. We're a species that reinvents our relationship with nature and builds and constructs and changes. That is the nature of humanity. All three of the dissident spaces are an attempt to assert that. If you really look at the essence of what the three ideologies are supposed to be, they are all an attempt to assert humanity, and all an attempt to celebrate human innovation. Libertarians. I'm not a libertarian. But what do libertarians, in their essence, what do they believe? They believe in growth. And they believe that they want to go out and start their own company, and they want to create, and they don't like taxes, and they don't like regulations, and they a lot of them even have a vision that sounds like the highest stage of communism, a world of so much abundance we don't need a government, a high-tech utopia, a resource-based economy, whatever they call it, right? And they believe in growth. They believe the free market is the way to get the growth, and they're wrong. But they believe in growth. Libertarianism is a belief that we want growth. That's what libertarians believe. Well, now what do the far right believe? The far right, in its essence, right, is a celebration of community. Because how is it that human beings build? They build with each other. Human beings, we work together. We're not individuals. Libertarians really much believe in individualism, but the far right, they believe in collectivism. They believe in the family. The far right, they love the family, and they love the nation and the country, and they love the race, and they're celebrating community. They're celebrating tradition. They're celebrating values, things that hold people together, because you have to come together to have growth. You can't grow on your own. Nobody in this world can say, I made this all by myself. There's nothing. This pen, thousands of people came together to make this pen. To make the plastic, to make the ink, to make the metal, to ship it, to sell it to me. Thousands of people came together. No one can say human beings are collective in their nature. And how are we collective? Well, we have families, right? We have nations, we have countries, we have, and the far right is a celebration of collectivism and tradition, traditional ways of being, etc. That's what it is. Unfortunately, though, it's wrapped up in supremacism and bullying and saying my race is better than your race, or my family, if my family is a heterosexual family, you're a homosexual, it's wrapped up in suppressing and trying to tear down other people and really trying to punish nonconformity when it really gets down to it. And that's a problem. Just like libertarians, they believe in growth, and it's wrapped up in belief in the free market. The far right, they believe in growth, but it's wrapped up in bullying, punishing nonconformity, supremacism. It's wrapped up in a lot of bad things, but in its essence, it is a celebration of collectivism, which is pro-growth. And finally, the essence of what Karl Marx wrote, if you read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific, if you read Critique of the Goethe Program, what is Marxism? Marxism is about growth. It's the idea that capitalism holds back development because of the problem of overproduction, because of technology holding back jobs, etc. But with a rationally planned economy, we can unleash creative forces and the productivity, and we can create vast abundance. And now we can create a society with so much wealth that we don't even need a government. And there'll be so much wealth from each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs. When the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, we can create that, right? And that with a planned economy, with the banks, factories, and industries rationally organized, we can overcome the irrationality of the market, plan and construct and unleash human creativity, and have growth. All of these ideologies, the left, the libertarian, and the far right, in their essence, are an attempt to say that we will fulfill Genesis 1:28. What is Genesis 1:28 of the Bible? Genesis 1:28, right? I will read it to you, right? Genesis 1:28. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish and the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves," to master our environment. It is an effort to put forward humanity's ability to rule over the earth, to be fruitful and multiply, right? And to build a more productive life. That's really the essence of what all of us want. But all three of those ideologies have been corrupted. The far right it's corrupted by hate and bigotry, supremacism, bullying, punishing nonconformity, punishing free thought. That's not good. They're trying to create the collectivism and the bonds that are necessary to create growth, but it becomes tainted. Libertarians, again, they're celebrating individual initiative and creative, etc., but it gets wrapped up in worship of the free market, and it gets wrapped up in drugs and hedonism and kind of a destructive. So there you go. And the left, right? You can pretend all day, well, we're the real you can say that, but you know that communism is also fucked. All right. Communism is wrapped up in wokeism, identity politics. Communism is wrapped up in a desire for vengeance and killing. The Cultural Revolution was a disaster. Pol Pot's year zero. It's not about building. It's about punishing those who have. It's about, there's problems in communism too, right? But all three of these movements are a cry of humanity to assert its will to grow. That is the essence of what all three schools of dissident thought believe. They are all an attempt of human beings to put forward their growth-oriented, innovationist, creative mind and to unleash humanity from the artificial restraints holding back our ability to grow. That's what all three schools of dissident thought really, in their essence, are striving for. And all three of them have been corrupted and distorted. They have found the weaknesses. All these people that are really attracted to collectivism, well, a lot of them are racist. A lot of them think that they're superior. A lot of them like to bully non-conforming people. And that's how they fucked up the far right. And libertarians, right? These people that really want to start their own business and be creative. Well, a lot of them are really anti-communist. And a lot of them really, and they fucked up libertarianism and communism. A lot of these people that want to have the means of production be rationally organized by society, well, a lot of them are jealous and hate rich people and want to punish people. A lot of them are identity politics oriented. A lot of them have a lot of rage, and they have fucked all three of these ideologies. All three of these ideologies are basically human beings trying to assert their original mind. It is human beings. We all have our soul, our original mind, the godlike part of us that just wants to create, that just wants to take the world around us and make it better, that just wants to love other people and live for the sake of others and have kindness and compassion and create. If you want to find happiness in this world, there are two ways to find it. Love, connect with other people and experience genuine love. Two, create, build, construct, go out there and make the world better. If you can love and you can create, you can find happiness. And all three of those ideologies are an attempt to find happiness. And they're an attempt to find happiness by loving and creating. Leftists, when it really gets down to it, what they really want, what the ideology really wants to do is love and create. And the same for libertarians. What they really want to do is they really want to love and create. And the same for the far right. What they really want is they want to love and create. But all three of these ideologies have been fucked. They've all been completely fucked. And they've been incited against each other. And innovationism and our movement is the only movement that understands that it's not about what team you're on. It's not, are you on the red team or the blue team? I'm a libertarian. It's not about that. Our job is to create a movement that is dedicated to celebrating and unleashing the godlike creativity within people, and to create a state, a government that is a pro-growth government, a government that is a pro-community, pro-family government, a government that controls and organizes the economy and unleashes human creativity to build. And we have the understanding that it's much more complicated. It is much more complicated than just what team are you on. And if we get stuck in what team are you on, we're missing the boat. The innovationist movement and the Center for Political Innovationism, Center for Political Innovation, we have an understanding, a unique understanding and a vision for building the kind of movement that can overcome the distractions, overcome the years of lead, overcome the hate, overcome the fandoms, bring people together and march forward and rescue America from the nightmare of globalism, imperialism. We have the vision and the understanding about what drives people and about what motivates them and how they can be unleashed to build and construct. And that is what is unique about our project. We are innovating. We are breaking new ground. And we understand this. And people who don't understand this, people that are stuck in libertarianism, people are stuck in communism, people are stuck in the far right, they're missing the boat. But we don't want to recruit them. We want to recruit average Americans. We want to recruit people who would never go working, and people, especially, we don't want to recruit people that are caught up in fandoms. We want to recruit average people who want to love and who want to create and want a community, because a lot of people are so lonely now. A lot of people are so atomized and isolated. And they love that. The ruling elite love that, because if you're all alone, there's one person who can influence you. One thing can influence you, and the algorithms can manipulate and control you. If you're all alone, if you're in COVID lockdown, you're all alone in your own little room, then this thing can fuck your mind. And they don't want you to be part of a family, and they don't want you to be part of a political organization. They don't want you to become part of a church. They don't want you to become part of anything. They want you all alone with your phone telling you what to think as they manipulate the algorithms and maneuver you. And that is what we are fighting against. We are trying to build a community of resistance, of people who want to build each other up and construct and help each other grow. And that is what we are doing. And this is a very difficult project. It's not easy. It is not easy to do what we are doing. We are swimming against the current. We're swimming upstream. But we're going to win, because this is the nature of humanity. The nature of humanity, the essence of humanity, the tool-making species, the pro-growth, the innovating species, the species that strives to force the environment to serve them, to reinvent nature around us, to be fruitful, to multiply and have dominion. That is not going to change, and we're going to win. But it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. But the main thing that we need to do is we need to not fall into the trap of the years of lead. We don't need a years of lead. We don't need political violence. We don't need fandoms. We need to build a community. We need to build a community. That is what we must do. That is what the Center for Political Innovation is doing. Come to our workshop in Los Angeles. Come to our national convention this summer. We've got a lot of work to do. Become a member, $15 a month, not that much. You can become a dues-paying member. Come to our Saturday meetings. Get involved in a local community. People are going to be protesting this weekend. People are organizing outreach. We just had a great outreach meeting. We're doing it. We're doing it, folks. We need you to get involved. The time to organize is now. And we are building something new, exciting, and amazing. I'm really excited about it. Dare to struggle, dare to win. And so why don't we do the roll call? Let's start doing the roll call. I want to remind you all, right? We can't collect super chats on this channel anymore. And it sucks because YouTube is being, is being censorship oriented. So if you want to ask me a question, send a Rumble rant on the Rumble or a Cash App to Caleb Maupin 22. Those are the two ways that you can send me questions for the second half of the show. That's the way we can do it. So just, you can do that. You can send me a Rumble rant on Rumble. And a little while into the second half, we're going to just switch to Rumble only. Y'all should be on Rumble, right? I'm not giving up my spot on YouTube. I'm going to fight to be on YouTube, but Rumble, the Q&As, etc., are going to be on Rumble. We'll do a couple questions here, but the Q&As are going to be on Rumble because at this point, we can't talk about important issues. We can't talk about important issues on YouTube. All right, names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. All right, we got Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Ryan in Kansas City. Alexander G. in Norway. Jacob in Wisconsin. Carter in Minnesota. Jane in New Zealand. Lunch is good too. Jason in Portland. Joseph Johnson in Chicago. Alex in Brazil. Auckland, New Zealand. Jim in Chicago. Jenny in Cincinnati. Joe in Durham, North Carolina. Courtney in Northern Virginia. Stefan in Denmark. Chris in Kew Gardens. Very, very good. Very, very good. Very, very good. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Chris in Kew Gardens. Anybody else? Names and locations. Patch in Arizona. Welcome. Brendan in New Jersey. Say a prayer for our friend Phil. He's been having some medical issues. I think he's probably listening tonight. I don't know, but he's been having some medical issues. So say a prayer for Phil in Brooklyn. A great guy, great friend of our community, great member of CPI, and he's having some medical issues. He reached out. Gabby in Chicago. Name above Richard L. Coughlin in Flag, Arizona. April and Chris in Salt Lake City. So Houston has Teslas. UT. All right. University of Texas, Utah, maybe. I don't know. Be well, everyone. Very, very good. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. Oh, Sarah Jackman in Oregon. Welcome, Sarah. Good to have you with us. Sarah does great Twitter work. She's always tweeting good stuff. I would follow Sarah on Twitter. She does good tweeting. John in Chicago, but got here late. Well, that's okay. That's okay. John just did great work at the Uhuru convention. He was our CPI representative. The full video, his speech is up already. But the full video is going to go up tomorrow. I mean, he did so much work at the Uhuru convention and it was really, really great. Sarah in Los Angeles. Hope you're coming to the workshop, Sarah. Have you registered? Information down below. Going to be a great workshop. All right. Very good. Very good. So, we're going to do a couple of the super chats tonight, and then we're going to go on to Rumble to do the rest. So you all should really be signing up for Rumble. We're going to keep the YouTube channel, but we're transitioning to Rumble because YouTube is ridiculous. But thanks everybody. So now there was a super chat that someone wanted to send last night, had technical difficulties sending. That was Carter. Carter in Minnesota. He asked what I thought of Father Coughlin. Now, Father Coughlin was a priest from Michigan during the Great Depression who was very anti-communist and anti-Semitic. He was a Roman Catholic priest, and he preached basically anti-communist and anti-Semitic radio sermons. He was called the radio priest, and he had kind of a mass movement of followers during the Great Depression. And he was in Michigan, and he was very, very opposed to the United Auto Workers, the auto workers unions, which were led by communists. What's interesting, you can listen to Father Coughlin's radio broadcasts. What's interesting about them? Oh, Penny in Minnesota, shout out. What's interesting about Father Coughlin's radio broadcasts is, first of all, his voice, right? So nowadays, I mean, I didn't grow up Catholic, but, priests, Catholic priests, they generally don't use a normal voice when they preach, but there's no real accent. But back in these times, Catholicism was so associated with Irish Americans that if you watch old movies from like the 50s, if you ever see a Catholic priest, he talks like this. He's got a little bit of a brogue. If you watch old movies, the police officer in New York City has a brogue. He's Officer O'Reilly. And and Father Coughlin has this like American brogue. Philippi, Brooklyn in the house from the hospital. Glad you're here. Say a prayer for Phil High. He's having some medical issues, but he's a beloved member of our organization, our community. And if you listen to Father Coughlin, it's not an Irish accent. It's like an American priest accent. Father God, these communists, they don't preach our message. I look up to our Father in heaven. And it's this like kind of Irish, but not completely Irish accent that was very common for priests. I look up to our Father in heaven who looks down upon us, and I think that he would not be happy with the way, and it's not fully Irish, but it's like it's like an Irish priest accent. But you listen to Father Coughlin, and a lot of his sermons are online. You can listen to the audio sermons that he gave in the 1930s. They generally start out with condemnations of capitalism, right? And he says, capitalism, the system of capitalism, where greed comes before moral principles. And, he's condemning capitalism. Then from there, he starts ranting about how bad the communists are, right? And it's the communists are the most dangerous thing ever. The communists are atheists. They don't believe in God. And he rants against communists. He hates communists. And then it ends with, and so we all just need to be good Christians. And so it's hard to say that he was necessarily a fascist, right? Because he's not advocating a fascist government. He's preaching that capitalism is ungodly. Capitalism is non-Christian. And then he's ranting. He gets really fired up and angry about the communists. He hates the communists. It's like this seething communists are the most evil thing. And then it ends with, we just need love, and we need to be Christian, and we need to, and that's Father Coughlin, the radio priest. He was removed from the radio because he was saying pro-Hitler things as World War II was starting. So, I mean, was he a fascist? Yeah, I guess. But he was just kind of a demagogue, I guess you could say. And he was an anti-communist, and his broadcasts were paid for by General Motors. General Motors saw him as an effective propaganda unit against the United Auto Workers Union and against the Communist Party. And that's basically, that's what Father Coughlin was. He was he was a demagogue. And if you listen to it, there's a sermon that he gave that was about World War I. That many people said that some of Donald Trump's speeches during the 2016 campaign referenced, right, where he talked about international bankers, and he talked about how awful World War I was, and how the American people didn't want to go to war, and how Congress sold them out and took them into war, and World War I served the international bankers, right? And it's kind of a populist sermon condemning World War I. It's like given on the anniversary. I think it's called like 20 years later or something like that. You listen to that, it's good agitating against World War I, about how awful World War I was. And he was speaking to an audience of people, many of whom had lived through World War I. And it's just kind of World War I was awful. And he talks about the international bankers. It was to serve the international bankers, etc. What's weird about Father Coughlin is that, like, he's very clearly anti-Semitic. at that time, anti-Semitism was not as stigmatized because the Holocaust had not happened yet. Once the Holocaust happened, everyone saw how awful anti-Semitism was, etc. But at that time, anti-Semitism was much more common, and especially among Roman Catholics. The Catholic Church had a history of saying negative things about the Jews, etc. And so what's weird is that he would deny being anti-Semitic. He would say things like, well, Jews are the problem, and the Jews, and then I am not anti-Semitic. He's kind of in denial about being anti-Semitic. It's very weird, right? It's like he's blatantly saying the Jews are bad, the Jews are the problem. And then it's followed up with, but I'm not anti-Semitic or anything. That's a little bit weird. And it's very much communism is the enemy, is what he's preaching. And it's just it was right-wing, far-right propaganda in the United States. Now, Carter has specifically asked about his relationship with Huey Long, right? So this is where it all gets very interesting. So when Roosevelt ran for re-election in 1936, right? There was the main opposition was a Republican who thought Roosevelt was becoming a communist. It was not free market enough. The Republican Party, they thought the Works Progress administration, where Roosevelt was hiring all these unemployed people, was dangerous. They opposed the Wagner Act that legalized labor unions. They thought labor unions were out of control. They were dangerous, etc. And Roosevelt, 1935 and into the 1936 election, he pivoted leftward. He hired millions of unemployed people. He supported labor unions. So Roosevelt was pivoting to the left. The main opponent was the Republicans. There was a third party that emerged. It was called the Union Party. And the Union Party was a group of people who said Roosevelt was not socialist enough, basically, not doing enough welfare state reforms. And that's who Father Coughlin supported in the 1936 election. Huey Long was assassinated. There's a very good chance Huey Long would have been the candidate of the Union Party. And Huey Long and Father Coughlin in the 1936 election, they basically said Roosevelt isn't doing enough to help poor people, which is actually a leftist message, right? And Huey Long, he had really taken the welfare state to another level in Louisiana. Why was Huey Long opposed to Roosevelt? And it looks like forces aligned with Roosevelt probably killed Huey Long, right? Huey Long was assassinated in 1935. And why? Why? Well, here's the thing. The Rockefellers, Standard Oil Company. Huey Long became the governor of Louisiana. Louisiana was a mostly agrarian state at that time, almost no labor union. It was an agrarian Jim Crow state. Huey Long became the governor of Louisiana, and he started taxing the oil company. Standard Oil Company extracted all the wealth from Louisiana and was getting rich off Louisiana's oil, and the people in Louisiana were poor. Huey Long kind of built a united front of all the business owners and all the wealthy people in Louisiana against Standard Oil, started taxing, put a very high tax rate on Standard Oil Company, and was using the money to provide, to wipe out illiteracy in the state of Louisiana, to build roads, etc. That was Standard Oil Company. And, the whole career of Huey Long was fighting Standard Oil, fighting the Rockefellers. Roosevelt, on the other hand, aligned with the Rockefellers, and his main opponent was the National Association of Manufacturers, because they didn't want labor unions. Roosevelt had worked with the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers are New York old money. They're out of New York City. Roosevelt had been the governor of New York and had just been a standard Democrat governor. Roosevelt didn't really become a Bonapartist until he was in office during the Great Depression. But the Rockefellers were Roosevelt's biggest backers. And his main enemy was the National Association of Manufacturers, right? And so Huey Long and Roosevelt were on opposite sides of one of the wealthiest families in America, right? And Roosevelt was willing to align with the labor unions against the National Association of Manufacturers, and and he worked with the Rockefellers. Whereas Huey Long, his whole thing was fighting the Rockefellers, and Huey Long was in Louisiana where there was no labor movement. There was no labor movement to speak of in Louisiana in those years. There was probably a few Communist Party members. It was the 1930s. The Communist Party was very popular. And Huey Long's mentor had been in the Socialist Party of America, right? His personal mentor had been in the Socialist Party USA. And there was like an agrarian, like farmer wing of the Socialist Party that had been popular in Louisiana that was not Marxist. It was like Christian socialist, populist, so to speak. And Huey Long kind of came out of that, but he was a Democrat. And he emerged in Louisiana politics by fighting the Ku Klux Klan, right? Because the Ku Klux Klan controlled the Democratic Party, and the Ku Klux Klan hated Catholics. And so Huey Long aligned with the Catholics against the Klan. And that's how he emerged. And he eventually became a populist. He was taxing Standard Oil Company. And there was no labor movement at all in Louisiana. So the Communist Party's focus was on building the labor movement. Huey Long had no relationship with the Communist Party. None. What's interesting is they called him a communist in the press a lot. There's a lot of cartoons of Huey Long with a big hammer and sickle behind him. Huey Long wants to create a communist dictatorship, etc. The communists called Huey Long a fascist because he was not aligned with labor unions, and he was opposing Standard Oil. Roosevelt was aligned with Standard Oil. If you read Earl Browder's book that he published for the 1936 election, What is Communism? You read that book, there's a chapter on the assassination of Huey Long. And in that chapter, it basically says Roosevelt probably killed Huey Long, and that it was divisions in the ruling class, etc. And that, Huey Long, in the final year of his life, was pivoting toward aligning with the Union Party. And the platform of the Union Party was massive social welfare, but they weren't really aligned with labor unions, which is weird. They were called the Union Party, but they didn't like the Communist Party. They didn't like the labor unions. They wanted massive social welfare programs. They wanted redistribution of wealth, share our wealth, like Huey Long had fought for, tax Standard Oil Company, tax the bankers, and provide lots of services to poor people. So that's really, and that shows you, by the way, this is kind of like what I've talked about with Jay Lovestone and all of that a lot of times alliances in politics are based on who you're aligned with, what faction is aligned with who, etc. And that's what you got to keep in mind. And so, it is weird. And Huey Long, his critique of Roosevelt was coming from the left. And Huey Long, the other thing to point about Huey Long, and this must be said, Huey Long was more anti-racist than Roosevelt. And that's something that really doesn't match him being a fascist. Huey Long was not a fascist. Huey Long was a populist. He was not a communist. He was not a leader of labor unions. He was not fighting for the dictatorship of the proletariat. He was fighting for the people of Louisiana, most of whom were sharecroppers and poor farmers, against Standard Oil Company. And there were a lot of capitalists who were part of his United Front. It was a populist class collaborationist movement against Wall Street oil companies. Labor unions had no role in it. It was a populist movement that built a powerful state, right? And the state of Louisiana, I mean, you could almost say Louisiana was like a mini Venezuela. And that's, if you read, there's a book by Greg Palast, where he compares Huey Long and Hugo Chavez. They're very similar, where they used state control of oil revenue to build a lot of government programs and start controlling the economy. And that's what Hugo Chavez did, and that's what Huey Long did in Louisiana. But he was on a different, he had no relationship with the labor movement, and he was fighting Roosevelt's primary ally in the ruling class, which was the Rockefellers. So I hope that gives you an answer to your question, Carter. This is something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And that's been one of the main attacks on me, is that I support Huey Long. Well, I do support Huey Long. Huey Long was a great American populist. Unfortunately, he was on the wrong side of Roosevelt, and he died before things really intensified. Who knows what could have happened? But, the rise of this, he was killed late 1936, after the 1936 presidential election, early 1937. That's when the sit-down strike wave happened. Where would Huey Long have been during the sit-down strikes? Would he have really come out, against the sit-down strikes? He could have, right? He could have. And at that point, Huey Long would not be remembered as a populist, right? If Huey Long had lived into 1936 and 37 and had been screaming about the sit-down strikes and had followed Father Coughlin to condemn the sit-down strikes and say the sit-down strikes were communist subversion or something, we wouldn't even remember Huey Long as a great populist. We'd remember him as a right-wing asshole. But he didn't live long enough to do that. All we saw of Huey Long is that he built a kind of state-controlled economy in Louisiana with control of oil revenue. By heavily taxing oil, he created kind of a state-controlled economy in Louisiana that was broken apart. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. This is all very, very interesting. So, all right. All right. So now we're going to do the Rumble rants. And we have Gabby sent a super chat over Gabby sent a Cash App, right? So we're taking super chats on Cash App. That's the way we're doing it, right? We can take Rumble rants on Rumble, and if you want to send me a Cash App, you want to Cash App me at Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. That's how we can take questions. So yeah, Gabby sent $5 on Cash App, but she didn't send a question, so she got to send a question, Gabby. But yeah, I'm gonna start answering Rumble rants next. I'm gonna start answering Rumble rants. We'll do a couple Rumble rants, and we might just then go on to Rumble, because we really just need to get on to Rumble, folks. I mean, it's just YouTube is so rigged. We need to get on to Rumble. So the first Rumble rant, Reestablishment says, "Well, I'm the Trinket Man. What is your favorite story of yours from the American Revolution?" That's a good question. And shout out to the Trinket Man. Really glad to have you. As far as what is my favorite story of the American Revolution, so when I was a kid, there was a Disney movie called Johnny Tremaine, and it was like a fictionalized account of the American Revolution, which is interesting. And it came out in the 50s. Johnny Tremaine, from what I understand, was actually very influenced by communism and by Popular Front politics, right? Even though it was made during McCarthyism, it was this ultra patriotic movie. But if you watch Johnny Tremaine, this patriotic movie about a kid who is injured, this kid is injured in an accident, and he becomes involved in the American Revolution. It's quite a patriotic Disney kids movie from the 1950s. It's apparently the people who wrote it were heavily influenced by communism, and it was considered to kind of be a communist film. So if you want to see a movie that is apparently heavily influenced by communism, but is actually an ultra patriotic film about the American Revolution, go watch Johnny Tremaine, which I enjoyed watching that movie when I was in elementary school. Didn't know it was communist, but there you go. Favorite story of the American Revolution. So, I mean, a couple things stand out. First of all, right, many people don't realize that a black man played a pivotal role in the American Revolution. And that gets kind of obscured, but Crispus Attucks, right? Crispus Attucks was a free black man who was not a slave, and he was killed in the Boston Massacre. And Malcolm X in his autobiography talks about Crispus Attucks, and there's actually a statue of Crispus Attucks, in Boston. And he was a black man who worked on a whaling vessel, and he was protesting against the British, and they killed him. And he's a martyr of the American Revolution. And that's a forgotten story. That this black man was murdered by the British during, a peaceful demonstration, and was killed. That's certainly an important story from the American Revolution. I visited Valley Forge when I was a kid, and that really strikes you, the winter at Valley Forge. That was a particularly, the sacrifices that were made, how hard it was for George Washington and the army, the freezing cold and all that they went to. That certainly stands out. The other thing is I grew up in Wayne County, Ohio, and Wayne County, Ohio was named after Mad Anthony Wayne, who was a military figure in the American Revolution, Mad Anthony Wayne, you know, and he was a military leader who engaged in like guerrilla warfare, if I'm not mistaken. You know, and he was kind of a figure in the American Revolution who was kind of considered to be pivotal. So I don't know. The other thing, I mean, the American Revolution, again, it was a mixed bag. One thing that I was made very aware of when I was a kid was learning about the American Revolution was the massacre at Hutton, where there were a group of Native Americans who'd converted to Moravian Christianity. And wounded British soldiers had gone to their village and gotten aid. And so the American colonists exterminated the whole village for aiding the British. That was a horrendous massacre that happened in Ohio during the American Revolution. And it was particularly awful. And I remember that was discussed. The massacre at Hutton, you know, an awful, awful incident, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Was that during the American Revolution or? Yeah, it was during the American Revolution. Yeah. 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 Awful, awful event. Right. 1782, right. 96 Moravian Native Americans were slaughtered for allegedly aiding the British. It was a crime against humanity. That was committed. I mean, and that goes to show, but does that mean the British Empire was right? And that's where these things get messy. You know, the Allies did awful things during World War II. They were obviously better than the Nazis, right? You know, but is the bombing of Dresden, was that good? Was Japanese internment good? No. But does that make the Nazis right? No. Right. So, you know, I mean, that's where these things get complicated. But yeah, I need to know more about the American Revolution, honestly. And I know that you, Trinket Man, you're a big fan of the what's it called? Of the works of Herbert Apotheker and his writing on the American Revolution. And maybe I need to revisit that. You've recommended that to me sometimes. I have never read such stuff. So, okay, so next Rumble rant. Well, first of all, I think we're going to go to Rumble now. We're going to transition to Rumble. So come on over to Rumble. Get on Rumble. I mean, I'll drop the link in the chat, but come on over to Rumble because we just want to build the Rumble at this point. You know, I do have a few more questions to answer. You know, but come to the Rumble. Come on over to the Rumble. We're taking it over to the Rumble. If you have any more questions, if you would like to super chat, just send me a Cash App, you know, or you can Rumble rant me. But we're going on over to Rumble because YouTube is not being good to us. So we're going on over to Rumble. Come on over to the Rumble. You know, come on over to the Rumble for the rest of the stream. I'll keep answering questions as they come in. Super chat me, Caleb Moppin 22 on Cash App, or you can Rumble rant me. But we're going on over to Rumble. Taking it on over to Rumble. Here we go.